What if David released a facehugger on a zombie? What would happen then? Let's speculate. David stood with perfect stillness, his synthetic frame betraying no sign of the curiosity that burned within his artificial mind. His pale eyes, designed to mimic human irises, yet possessing far greater acuity, fixed upon the figure before him. The creature swayed almost imperceptibly, its milky gaze locked onto David with a primal intensity that belied its deteriorated state. Between them stretched a barrier, 20 inches of material born from the cutting edge of material science. Its core consisted of a nanostructured ceramic matrix, each particle precisely arranged and fused under extreme pressure and temperature. This foundation was interwoven with a three-dimensional lattice of carbon nanotubes and graphene sheets, created through a process of atomic-scale vapor deposition. The result was a material with a density approaching that of diamond, yet with superior flexibility and near-perfect resistance to both physical force and chemical corrosion. On both exterior surfaces of this barrier, an array of quantum dot displays created a seamless illusion of transparency. The creature on the other side was a grotesque perversion of human form, the result of an artificially engineered pathogen's aggressive genetic restructuring. Once a man, now it served as a mobile vector for this insidious contagion. Its skin had taken on a mottled, grayish-blue hue, a consequence of severe tissue necrosis and impaired circulation. It twitched and spasmed erratically due to constant, uncontrolled nerve stimulation. This engineered virus, a product of clandestine research, had fundamentally rewritten the creature's genetic code. It worked by hijacking cellular mechanisms, particularly in the brainstem and basal ganglia. This resulted in the reanimation of basic motor functions and primal instincts, while higher cognitive processes were irrevocably destroyed. The pathogen also induced unchecked cell division in certain tissues, leading to enhanced strength and resilience at the cost of rapid cellular degradation. Several teeth were missing from its slack jaw, casualties of its multiple frenzied attempts to reach David, each one thwarted by the invisible barrier between them. The zombie had hurled itself at the wall repeatedly, its decaying hands clawing and its jaws snapping in a vain effort to sink its teeth into what it perceived as prey. With each impact, more teeth had shattered or been knocked loose, scattering across the floor of its containment area. After the fifth attempt, even the zombie's virus-addled brain seemed to process the futility of its actions. It now stood, eyes fixed on David. Intermittent grunts and raspy growls escaped its throat, the only sounds breaking the eerie silence between them. For the past 5 hours, this macabre face-off had persisted, the zombie's unblinking stare met by David's unwavering synthetic gaze. Finally, David's lips curled into a subtle smile as he regarded the specimen before him. Subject ZB-008 was a relatively fresh transformation, its flesh largely intact despite the mottled grayish-blue discoloration. The subject appeared to be a male in his late 30s, with a muscular build and calloused hands suggesting manual labor. Fascinating preservation. He was likely infected quite recently, David murmured. The lab's AI responded concisely. Correct. Estimated time since initial infection, 72 hours. David's gaze lingered on a company logo tattooed on the subject's forearm. The android then made the following analysis. Intriguing, the musculature seems particularly well preserved. Perhaps an unexpected interaction with the subject's heightened physical conditioning. Possible, the AI confirmed. Muscle tissue degradation rate 18%, slower than standard subjects. David nodded, his eyes never leaving the specimen. Excellent. Prepare the xenomorph embryo for introduction, David said to the lab's AI. The AI acknowledged, and David, with fluid, precise movements, turned to a nearby console. His synthetic fingers danced across the interface, initiating a complex series of protocols. A soft hiss emanated from a panel in the wall as a cylindrical container emerged bathed in a pale blue light, indicating its cryogenic state. David carefully removed the container, cradling it with an almost tender reverence. Inside, barely visible through a layer of frost on the transparent surface, lay a facehugger, its spider-like form curled tightly in suspended animation. He approached a small antechamber adjacent to the zombie's enclosure. After entering a series of commands, a sealed port opened. David placed the cryo-container inside and sealed the chamber. Initiating controlled thaw and introduction sequence, the AI announced. David watched as the antechamber cycled through a rapid decontamination process. Then, with a soft pneumatic whoosh, a panel slid open on the zombie's side of the barrier. The cryo-container moved forward on a mechanical arm, its surface now clear of frost. As it entered the zombie's enclosure, the lid retracted. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, with startling speed, the facehugger unfurled its legs and launched itself towards the unsuspecting zombie. The facehugger attached itself instantly as the zombie turned towards it. David sat down cross-legged, a wide smile spreading across his face, clearly excited by the unprecedented interaction unfolding before him. While a normal human would have immediately fallen unconscious, the zombie did not. Its rage-fueled mind directed its hands towards the facehugger, nails sinking into the creature's flesh, unperturbed by the acidic blood. David observed, aided by an array of advanced sensory technology that reproduced all sounds from inside the containment area with perfect fidelity. He noticed the facehugger's digits twitching and its tail tightening in a futile effort to subdue its host. Then, David heard a sickening crunch. The zombie had bitten off the facehugger's ovipositor. Fascinated, David watched as the zombie actually managed to peel the facehugger off its face. No other test subject, save one, had ever managed to fight back against a facehugger. As the facehugger was pulled away further, David could see the zombie's mouth melting from the acidic blood. This seemed only to agitate the zombie further as it kept pulling, its grunts growing louder and more frenzied. Finally, the zombie managed to pull the facehugger off entirely. At this point, David observed how the creature released its grip on the zombie's neck and coiled around its hand, almost crushing it. Yet the zombie remained unfazed. With savage intensity, the zombie bit into the facehugger's writhing form. Acid blood sprayed across its face, immediately beginning to corrode the infected flesh. Undeterred, the zombie tore off a substantial chunk of the alien creature and swallowed it whole. As it went for a second bite, the corrosive effects of the facehugger's blood became catastrophically apparent. The zombie's lower jaw, weakened by the acid, detached entirely and fell to the floor with a wet thud. Simultaneously, the ingested portion of the facehugger began to eat through the zombie's chest cavity from the inside, creating a gruesome hole that exposed partially dissolved internal organs. But, despite all this, the zombie's single-minded aggression didn't waver. It dug its fingers into the facehugger's body, spraying more acidic blood over itself. With a sickening tearing sound, it ripped the alien parasite into two writhing halves. The zombie then attempted to bite again, an action now impossible due to its missing jaw. Its face was barely recognizable by this point, large portions having melted away to expose the underlying bone and muscle structure. The chest cavity continued to expand as internal organs liquefied and exited out of the growing hole. After several more seconds of frenzied activity, the zombie's movements began to slow. The massive tissue damage had taken its toll, but, remarkably, the creature did not expire. The acid, for all its destructive power, had not reached the brainstem where the virus maintained its strongest hold. The zombie collapsed to the floor. Though immobile, it was far from inactive. Spasmodic tremors ran through what remained of its musculature. Its limbs twitched and jerked in erratic patterns, driven by the relentless viral impulses still coursing through its neural pathways. David observed the scene with rapt attention. The zombie lay somewhat quiet on the floor, its convulsions gradually becoming less frequent. Nearby, the two halves of the facehugger also rested motionless, their acidic blood pooling harmlessly on the enclosure's floor. The surface, composed of the same nanoceramic alloy infused with carbon nanotubes and graphene sheets as the walls, remained impervious to the corrosive effects of the xenomorph's blood. After several minutes of silent observation, David addressed the lab's AI. Fascinating results, but clearly not the outcome we were seeking. It appears we'll need to take a different approach. David finished. The AI responded promptly, agreed. What parameters would you like to adjust for the next trial? David's expression remained neutral, his synthetic features betraying no emotion as he responded. We'll bypass the facehugger entirely. Prepare a restrained zombie specimen. I'll surgically introduce the xenomorph embryo directly into its chest cavity. Understood, the AI acknowledged. Subject ZB009, another outbreak victim, is being prepped and placed into a biological intervention apparatus as we speak. The specimen will be ready for the procedure in approximately 20 minutes. Excellent, David replied. He then made his way through the ship's corridors to a highly secure area designated for cryogenic organic storage. After inputting a security sequence, David accessed a sealed compartment containing carefully preserved xenomorph eggs. Selecting one, he removed the frost-covered egg from its cryochamber and placed it in a portable containment unit. With his precious cargo secured, David proceeded to the surgical laboratory located in another section of the ship. Upon entering the lab, David approached the XM5000, an advanced surgical unit designed for operations on extraterrestrial organisms. Its components were crafted from a cutting-edge ceramic metallic composite infused with nanoscale neutralizing agents, capable of withstanding even the most corrosive biological substances known to science. David carefully transferred the egg from the portable unit to the XM5000's main chamber. He initiated the machine's environmental controls, setting the internal temperature to just above freezing. cold enough to keep the egg in a state of suspended animation, yet warm enough to allow for precise surgical manipulation. As the chamber sealed, David began the procedure. Robotic arms, responding to his expert commands, delicately peeled back the egg's layers. Using micro-incision tools, David navigated the facehugger's dormant form with exquisite care. He located the embryo sac and extracted the tiny xenomorph embryo. The entire process took just under 15 minutes, the egg remaining inert throughout. David placed the embryo in a cryogenic stasis unit, then sealed it within a reinforced containment vessel. With the extracted parasite secured, he began making his way to the biological intervention apparatus where ZB009 awaited, ready to serve as the host for this unprecedented xenobiological experiment. ZB009, a fully infected male in his late 50s, lay restrained on the horizontal table within the Nexus 7. The Nexus 7 was designed to contain and manipulate even the most dangerous and corrosive biological entities. Its frame was constructed from a hybrid alloy of titanium, tungsten, and carbon nanotubes, providing unparalleled strength and resistance to both physical force and chemical corrosion. The surface was coated with a layer of synthetic diamond, further enhancing its durability and acid resistance. Swarms of nanobots hovered above the restrained zombie, capable of instantly forming into any required surgical tool or additional restraint. ZB009's chest was exposed and marked for the impending procedure. Multiple restraints, formed from the same acid-resistant alloy as the machine's frame, held the subject immobile at key points along its body. The zombie thrashed against these restraints with inhuman strength, but they held firm. Above the zombie, an array of tools hovered, ready for use. These were temporary formations of the nanobots, poised to transform into whatever implement David might require during the procedure. The Nexus 7 housed an advanced onboard AI, capable of performing complex surgical procedures autonomously. However, David opted for manual control, preferring to guide the process himself through a set of remote controls. David had to rely on these remote controls because the Nexus 7, while incredibly advanced, was designed primarily for human operators. As such, it lacked a direct neural interface that would have allowed an android like David to connect directly and operate the machinery effortlessly. As a result, David had to rely on a more primitive and slower data transfer method, manual controls. David initiated the surgical procedure by guiding the nanobots to form into a precise scalpel. With meticulous care, he made an incision in the zombie's chest cavity, large enough to accommodate the xenomorph embryo. The zombie's thrashing intensified, but the restraints held firm. David then directed the nanobots to create a specialized insertion tool, using it to carefully place the embryo within the host body. Once the embryo was in place, David utilized the Nexus 7's advanced suturing capabilities to close the incision, leaving barely a trace of the invasive procedure. The entire Nexus 7 apparatus, along with the restrained zombie, was housed within a large containment chamber. This chamber was nearly identical to the one that had contained subject CB-008 earlier, featuring the same 20-inch thick walls made of acid-resistant nanoceramic alloy. The chamber's dimensions were approximately 15 feet by 15 feet, providing ample space for the Nexus 7 and allowing room for any potential containment measures that might be necessary. During the operation, David had been seated at a control station directly outside the chamber. A complex array of holographic interfaces and tactile controls allowed him to manipulate the Nexus 7 with precision. With the surgical procedure complete, David rose from his seat and stepped away from the control panel. He moved to stand directly in front of the chamber's nano-display transparent wall, his tall frame mere inches from the barrier. The advanced display technology made it appear as though nothing separated him from the contents of the chamber. For hours, David remained in this position, completely motionless. His synthetic eyes, designed to operate without the need for blinking, stayed fixed on the restrained zombie within the Nexus 7. The only movement in the room came from the data readouts flickering across the nano displays, providing a constant stream of information about the parasite's development. As time passed, the zombie's convulsions grew more violent. Suddenly, the AI's voice broke the silence. Parasite emergence imminent. Estimated time to exit, 30 seconds. David's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Magnify view on the host, he commanded. The nano display immediately zoomed in, providing a clear, close-up image of the zombie's heaving chest. Release the containment tube around the Nexus 7, David ordered next. With a soft hiss, the additional protective barrier around the surgical apparatus retracted into the chamber floor. Finally, David gave his last command: disengage all restraints on the host. As the Nexus 7's holding clamps released, the zombie's thrashing reached a fever pitch. It immediately jerked forward, tearing itself off the machine. In a violent flurry of motion, it lunged at David. Over and over, the creature hurled itself against the transparent barrier, its decayed fists slamming into the unyielding material with relentless force. David, standing motionless, didn't flinch. Then, without warning, the zombie stopped mid-lunge. It froze. The primal instinct to attack David faltered as something else took precedence. Its gaze shifted down to its chest, where the skin began to twitch and ripple unnaturally. The creature let out a low, furious growl and started clawing at its own torso. And then it happened. The zombie let out a horrific guttural scream as its chest exploded outward. From the gaping wound emerged the Chestburster. It was about a foot tall, unnaturally thin, but writhing with savage energy. Its skin had a mottled, sickly hue, resembling the necrotic tissue of its host, and its metallic teeth gleamed under the chamber's sterile lights. The sound it made as it screeched was ear-piercing, a high-pitched, keening wail that echoed in the sealed room. David watched, utterly fascinated, but before David could make any further observations, the zombie, still functional despite the gaping hole in his chest, reached up with a grotesque display of speed and grabbed the Chestburster by its tail. The creature let out a piercing shriek, twisting and writhing, but the zombie didn't hesitate. It bit down on the Chestburster, its jaw tearing into the xenomorph hybrid's body. The hiss of acidic blood filled the air, and the zombie's face began to melt under the corrosive onslaught. But the zombie, driven by its unstoppable rage, continued its assault. The Chestburster, in a fit of primal survival instinct, twisted and lunged, its razor-sharp metallic teeth sinking into the zombie's hand. But even as the creature fought back, the zombie's free hand clamped down with inhuman strength on the Chestburster's head, holding it in a death grip. With one final violent motion, the zombie bit down into the Chestburster's head, its jaw clamping shut with a wet, sickening crunch. The Chestburster let out a shrill, agonized scream as its skull collapsed under the force, its body going limp in the zombie's grasp. David observed, his expression neutral, as the zombie continued to devour the Chestburster, tearing into its body with reckless abandon. The acid continued to melt away the zombie's flesh, eating through its face, neck, and torso with every bite. The zombie's head became a corroded mess, barely recognizable, yet it persisted, pulling more of the Chestburster into its mouth. Finally, the zombie's body could take no more. With a final convulsion, its mutilated form collapsed onto the floor. The half-eaten remains of the Chestburster spilled from the gaping wound in the zombie's chest, dripping through the cavity in its decimated torso and pooling on the floor. The acid hissed and fizzled as it continued to eat away at the remains. "Interesting," David said with a blank expression. Soon enough, David repeated the process, but this time kept the zombie restrained as the Chestburster emerged. David's eyes tracked the Chestburster as it skittered across the polished floor. The creature's skin bore an unsettling resemblance to the flesh of its zombie host. Its small head swiveled rapidly, assessing its sterile surroundings with predatory acuity. "Commence growth protocol," David commanded. A panel in the chamber's wall slid open, revealing a chute. Through it tumbled a mass of raw, synthetic protein matter, a specially formulated organic compound designed to accelerate xenomorph growth. The Chestburster, driven by instinct and ravenous hunger, darted towards the heap. It tore into the mass with ferocious intensity, its metallic teeth easily shredding the dense material. As it fed, David observed minute changes occurring in real time. The creature's exoskeleton began to darken, taking on a glossy sheen reminiscent of the characteristic xenomorph carapace, yet mottled with patches of discolored, almost necrotic-looking tissue. David then spoke out the following analysis. The zombie virus appears to be interacting with the xenomorph's rapid cellular regeneration. Computer, initiate full-spectrum analysis and record all observations. Hours passed as the creature continued to grow at an alarming rate. The hybrid's head developed into the iconic elongated shape, but with disturbing variations. Fleshy, tumor-like growths protruded from its skull. As it neared full maturity, the aberrant xenomorph's behavior became increasingly erratic. It would pace the chamber with frenetic energy, occasionally stopping to claw at its own exoskeleton as if trying to tear away the very flesh that encased it. Its movements were a jarring mix of the fluid grace typical of xenomorphs and the jerky, uncoordinated motions characteristic of the infected. David observed the xenomorph's erratic behavior with keen interest. "Prepare to release subject ZB-010 from the Nexus 7. I want to test the hybrid's reflexes and combat capabilities," David said to the AI that operated the Nexus 7. "Understood," the AI responded. "Releasing containment protocols now." The Nexus 7's restraints disengaged, and the zombie lurched forward, immediately fixating on the xenomorph. It charged with surprising speed, arms outstretched and jaw snapping. The hybrid xenomorph's reaction was delayed, its movements initially sluggish. However, when it finally responded, the action was blindingly fast. In a blur of motion, it lashed out with its talons, effortlessly tearing through the zombie's decaying flesh. The zombie's arm was severed at the shoulder, falling to the floor with a wet thud. Undeterred, the zombie pressed its attack. The xenomorph's subsequent movements alternated between lightning-quick strikes and moments of apparent confusion. It shredded the zombie with terrifying efficiency, but each burst of activity was followed by periods of disorientation. With the zombie neutralized, David noticed alarming changes in the hybrid's physiology. Its exoskeleton began to bulge and shift, new growths forming and bursting in rapid succession. The creature's size increased dramatically, far beyond normal xenomorph proportions. Most notably, its inner jaw began to extend, protruding further and further until it seemed unable to retract. The zombie xenohybrid's head grew even bigger to accommodate this growth, its skull reshaping in real time. Eventually, the mutated xenomorph's mass became too great for its legs to support. It slumped to the floor, inner jaw fully extended and twitching spasmodically. "Analyze and report," David ordered the AI. The AI's voice filled the room. Analysis indicates a complex interaction between the xenomorph's adaptive biology and the zombie virus. The xenomorph's cells are attempting to counteract the viral infection through accelerated growth and mutation. This has resulted in uncontrolled cellular proliferation, particularly in regions with high concentrations of stem-like cells, such as the oral cavity and exoskeletal growth plates. This is leading to the observed abnormal growth patterns and physiological changes. Additionally, the zombie virus is affecting the xenomorph's neural pathways, causing the observed erratic behavior and periods of reduced motor control. The creature's nervous system appears to be in a constant state of decay and regeneration, which explains the fluctuations in its response times and coordination. David's eyes gleamed with interest. Remarkable! The ultimate adaptive organism, locked in an endless battle with an engineered virus designed for persistent infection. AI, prepare the vivisection chamber. I want to study this specimen in detail. Vivisection chamber prepared, the AI confirmed, initiating transfer protocols. The ceiling above the writhing xenomorph hybrid split open with a soft hiss, revealing a complex network of machinery. A swarm of nanobots descended, their tiny forms glinting in the harsh light. With remarkable precision, they coalesced into a large, cradle-like structure, perfectly contoured to the xenomorph's misshapen form. Before the main swarm made contact, a smaller group of nanobots zipped forward, forming into restraints that secured the creature's limbs and head. The hybrid let out a strangled screech, its permanently extended inner jaw quivering as it tried to resist. Once the restraints were in place, the larger formation of nanobots gently lifted the xenomorph. The creature's massive bulk rose steadily towards the ceiling, its grotesquely elongated form disappearing into the opening above. The process was silent and efficient. As the last of the xenomorph's twisted tail vanished from view, the ceiling aperture began to close. Just before it sealed completely, David caught a glimpse of the creature being transferred into the adjacent vivisection chamber, ready for his meticulous examination. With a final click, the ceiling panel locked into place, leaving no trace of the extraordinary event that had just transpired.